Hello, I think this is episode 291 of Stand Up. Wow, 9 episodes, and it's 300. Impressive, if I do say so. Joining me today, writer, author, activist, Anushay Hossain joins me, and domestic extremist and terrorist expert and analyst, Jared Holt from the Atlantic Council. I am Pete Dominic. It's time to stand up right now. Hello, my friends, and especially my many friends listening in Texas, where the weather has pounded you into submission, freezing temperatures, rotating power outages, and houses not built to withstand a winter storm like this. Coming up, I'll play a couple of messages I solicited from Texas listeners and friends for you. Had a great Monday with my family. They had the week off. My daughters have the week off. And it doesn't look like we'll be going anywhere. Both my wife and I are working a lot, and all the ski areas, we didn't plan ahead to get tickets, so we're just here. My daughter had a couple of her friends over today, and they went outside, and they were hanging out outside in their snow gear. My daughter calls me while I'm out here in the shed, and just wrapped up an interview, and she said, "Can you come pick us up and take us sledding?" I said, I'm in the middle of work right now, and yes, I can. Just dropped everything, and she was down there. She was at the park, I should say, and so I had to jump in the car and just go grab them and bring them sledding. But I'm just very psyched that I was in a situation where I'm able to go and do that and to make that choice, and I couldn't do it without your support. Thank you for your paid subscriptions that allows me to work from my shed. Go to patreon.com/PeteDominic to subscribe to give me more time with my kids. Thank you. Point is, I didn't have the right gear. I had run out of the shed, and I was just wearing a pair of, insulated khakis and sneakers. And I went and I got on the sled, left the shed, got on the sled, and slid down this very icy hill. It was, covered in snowy ice. So it was pretty awesome for sledding. I went over a jump and bit my tongue. Not badly, but I got injured right away. I could barely walk back up because it was so slippery, but we had a lot of laughs and made a couple of videos. And I'll share with you the video that I'm about to just mention here, because they videotaped me sledding. And again, I wasn't prepared. And I was wearing these gray khakis that were a little loose around the waist, and when you see me bend down to get in the sled, you see my underwear and the tip of my ass crack, and it's so, I rarely get embarrassed, but that is so pathetic to me. That's I don't want that. I don't want people seeing my underwear and ass crack. I don't want to be that guy, and I definitely don't want to be that dad. I was wildly unprepared for sledding. I don't know if anybody noticed, but I had to tell all of you that happened and liberate this truth for me to be seen. I need you to see me and all of my glory and all of my parenting. I'm so glad that I did it, and we had a great time, got a pizza on the way back, and had a bunch of laughs and fun on the very weird, snowy, icy trail. So get out there. Get your vitamin N, send your pictures of the nature to me, and if your kids ask you to join them outside, do everything in your power. Cancel, reschedule, but make that choice to say yes, so that when you look back at those videos, you don't say, "Oh, I missed those times." You say, "No, I don't miss those times. I was the one behind the camera. I was there for those times." That's how I like to look at it, at least. Okay. Two great guest segments coming up, but this first segment every day is a great roundup of news from the last 24 hours. That's why I call it The Last 24. I give you a potpourri of selections of things that you could hear in your ears that help you digest and analyze what just happened in the last 24 hours. It's a great news segment. It's a reason to listen to the show and suggest that others do as well. If you're looking for a daily news segment, come to Stand Up with Pete Dominick, where it's produced, hosted, and edited by yours truly from my shed. And it's getting easier and easier to find great commentary because everybody's a pundit. I mean, there are now young kids making edited pieces of commentary on TikTok like this kid. I don't know who he is. I wish I could give attribution to him, and if I can find it, I'll backsell it. But listen to this kid. I liked it. It's self-explanatory.
Republican Party shouldn't exist. Hot take, I know. Listen, let's say I'm about to race you. 100-meter dash in front of everybody. You finna get smoked. I have a lot of people that are very dedicated to me and really want me to win. And I'm so confident that 6 months before our race, I'm saying the only way you're gonna win is if you cheat. I keep repeating that, and my fans begin to say the same thing too. The day comes and we race. We lace up in front of everybody on national television. We run and you beat me. I immediately begin saying, it's because you cheated, like I said months ago. I say that over and over again to get the people who love me really riled up. The official referees, including some I appointed, look at our race footage 62 times. None of them find any evidence that you cheated. Despite this, I continue to say that you cheated and schedule a rally. It was originally going to be at a lot by your house, but I intervened with the permit and make sure it's at your house. Enraged by my continuous lying, they storm your house, 5 people die, and they were looking for you and your family to kill. Should I go to prison? Well, that doesn't fucking matter because I'm friends with 43 out of the 100 people deciding whether or not I go to prison. And they decided I did nothing wrong because I said peacefully one time, we Republicans love the Constitution. Until we fucking don't.
Yeah, I thought that was fantastic. And I found his name, J. William J, user J. William J on the TikTok app. By the way, I'm now on TikTok. I don't even know how to say it. Clubhouse. I'm on Clubhouse. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Cameo, but I'm not doing that. If anybody really wants to talk to me, just let me know. You don't have to pay me, and I'll give you a call. That goes for pretty much anyone, actually. If you want me to call you, then just DM me on Twitter or email me standupwithpete@gmail.com and I'll call you. Okay, so also wanted to play for you a clip from Chris Hayes' All In. He had fellow colleague NBCer now, Mehdi Hasan on. And Mehdi Hasan has been critical of the Democrats giving up too easy on impeachment when they should have called witnesses. And I think he makes a good case here. In the end, I don't think I really agree. I think I agree that they needed to move on. But I think this is good. I wanted to share it with you. Here's Mehdi Hasan.
And Ted Lieu just made the argument as well. I just find this to be a bizarre argument. If the argument is, well, we wouldn't have got any extra votes out of it, we wouldn't have got to 67, well, why have a trial at all then? Why bother doing any of this stuff if the argument is we're going to let the Republicans decide what is and isn't acceptable in this trial? I mean, I find that bizarre. And I interviewed Eric Swalwell on my show earlier, another House impeachment manager. He said history will judge the Republicans. Ted Lieu just said to you, history will judge the Republicans. I don't know about your viewers, but I'm fed up of waiting for history to judge the Republicans. Why can't we judge them in the here and now? And the way you do that is not worrying about whether you get to 67 or not, which we all knew they were never going to get to 67. It's about doing your best job to fully expose the truth of what happened on January the 6th and expose Republicans in the process. And that means you call for witnesses. That means you bring witnesses. That means we hear from everyone. I mean, think about this. If Barack Obama had incited Black Lives Matter protesters to attack the Capitol to stop the electoral count for Donald Trump in 2017, do you think the Republicans would have held a 5-day witness-free trial in order to get home for Valentine's Day? They wouldn't have. They did Benghazi for 4 years, millions of dollars. Hillary Clinton testified for 11 hours in one go. They didn't move on. I'm not sure why Democrats are always moving on.
So I would tend to agree with that argument, guys, if I didn't think there wasn't going to be a major investigation into January 6th and the days and people responsible for promoting it. But then listen to this news today from CNBC.
Nancy Pelosi wants a 9/11 style commission to look into that insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. She told House Democrats today she plans to take steps to form a panel to investigate and report on the facts and causes relating to the assault. Both the House and Senate would need to approve such a commission. Pelosi also insists more money has to be budgeted to protect the Capitol and keep members of Congress safe. Meanwhile, Republicans are demanding more information from Pelosi herself about decisions that were made regarding security, both before and after the insurrection.
Well, who cares what Republicans want? I mean, they're not in charge of the investigations. They don't have control of the House. That's why elections matter, consequences matter, and the 2018 midterm elections matter, which is why Democrats are in charge of this investigation. It's the same reason why Republicans spent like hundreds of millions of dollars investigating what happened in Benghazi with several, I think it was like 9 or 10 different investigations. So, yeah. Guess what? Shoes on the other foot. Democrats are in charge, and they are going to investigate January 6th, and they should. And now here's angry liberal man in a three-piece suit on the roof of his Manhattan apartment yelling at his camera about what he thinks should be next. Keith Olbermann.
President Biden can stay as far away from this as he wants, but his Justice Department must now appoint a special counsel to investigate Trump's personal role in the treason of January 6th and to prosecute him ceaselessly. Moreover, as the Watergate investigation proved, such a prosecutor is only truly powerful if a public investigation of these crimes runs concurrently for months and months and months. So Democratic leadership must endorse and enact a 9/11 Commission-style investigation in the House and or the Senate of the January 6th coup, indeed of Trump's entire presidency. As soon as the COVID relief bill is enacted, this commission must be established, and if the Republicans do not like it, let them burn in hell. The Democrats have control of the White House, the Senate, the Congress. The Republicans have a leader who just tried to overthrow American democracy. His sycophants and his sympathizers are riddled throughout Congress and state legislatures. They must be revealed, prosecuted, and imprisoned. If not, democracy is at death's door. Because Trump finally did it. He finally did shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue back there, and he didn't lose any voters. He didn't lose anything. And what he shot in the middle of Fifth Avenue was American democracy, and we are letting him get away with it. We must have a Trump special counsel, and we must have a Trump investigation committee.
Woo! Keith Olbermann. No, I do miss that commentary. I'm not going to lie to you. I might not like that guy because he seems like a massive asshole, but he writes and delivers quite a lick. And you know what else is pretty well written? Nancy Pelosi's letter announcing this. And I'm going to read it in its entirety to you. I'm going to perform Nancy Pelosi's letter statement about the 9/11 style commission to investigate the January 6th insurrection. Dear Democratic colleague, today we celebrate the birthdays of America's two greatest presidents, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. George Washington was the patriarch of our country who, with his courage, fought for and won our independence at great odds, who, with his wisdom, then established our democracy, the greatest that the world would ever see, and who, with his prescience, cautioned against political parties at war with their own government, warning that through parties, cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government. Abraham Lincoln saved our country from division by winning a war and the battle of ideas. He wisely said that if the division and destruction ever come to America, it will come from within. In his Lyceum address, he said, quote, "If danger ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher." Our country was blessed with the great patriotism of these presidents. And now we are grateful for the great patriotism of our impeachment managers, who under the leadership of Congressman Jamie Raskin did an excellent job defending our democracy and honoring our Constitution. Now, as always, security is the order of the day. The security of our country, the security of our capital, which is the temple of our democracy, and the security of our members. For the past few weeks, General Honoré has been assessing our security needs by reviewing what happened on January 6th and how we must ensure that it does not happen again. He has been working with the committees of the jurisdiction and will continue to make proposals. It is clear from his findings and from the impeachment trial that we must get to the truth of how this happened. To protect our security, our next step will be to establish an outside, independent 9/11-style commission to, quote, investigate and report on the facts and causes relating to the January 6, 2021 domestic terrorist attack upon the United States Capitol complex, and relating to the interference with the peaceful transfer of power, including facts and causes relating to the preparedness and the response of the United States Capitol Police and other federal, state, and local law enforcement in the National Capital Region. And as we prepare for the commission, it is also clear from General Honore's interim report that we must put forth a supplemental appropriation to provide for the safety of members and the security of the Capitol. We will be forever grateful to the Capitol Police for their life-saving courage and heroism in securing the Capitol and protecting members. I thank those of you who have signed on as co-sponsors for the legislation honoring the Capitol Police and other law enforcement for the Congressional Gold Medal, and I urge others to do so as well. As we go forward, we must be worthy of the courage and wisdom of the patriarch of our country, George Washington, and the savior of our country, Abraham Lincoln. Thank you all for your courage and patriotism. Best wishes. That is from the Speaker of the House in a press release titled, Dear Colleague, Security, Security, Security. That's the title of it, dated February 15, 2021. And by the way, I nailed that in one take without one misspeak or one stutter. Damn, where is my award? And how about all that cheesy patriotic music I put under it to allow for it to be endured? I mean, the only reason I read the whole thing and why I want to make sure, this is such a big deal. What happened on January 6th? It was extremely terrifying and dramatic, especially for those who were involved, who were inside the Capitol, from the media, members of the media, to the congressional representatives and their staffs and security. It was horrible. And it wasn't the end of something, sadly. It's easy to see it as the beginning of something. And so I'm going to keep talking about the threat that is posed by this type of domestic extremism. And I'm excited to share my conversation with Jared Holt today from the Atlantic Council, who studies this for a living. But I'll keep talking about this and keep trying to understand it and keep exposing it as much as I can. And anybody you think I should talk to, or if you want to talk about it, I'd love to speak with you. So that's why I made a big deal of it. That's why I read the whole letter, and maybe it was a little bit too much. And so sorry. But this is the kind of argument that you are going to start to hear. Here is a prominent senator from Wisconsin, conspiracy theorist, racist, and one of the possibly the biggest assholes that anybody who knows him knows, Senator Ron Johnson on Milwaukee radio station WISN, downplaying the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol and objecting to the media and national security's experts' analysis of the riots as, quote, armed insurrection. Take it away, fuckface.
Well, one thing, and this will get me in trouble, but I don't care. Again, I condemn what happened. I mean, it was reprehensible. Never should have happened. But there were groups of agitators that were at the tip of the spear that caused that. Not the tens of thousands of Trump supporters who would never even contemplate that. And quite honestly, where the video was edited, where people were helping police. Okay, but the fact of the matter is, this didn't seem as like an armed insurrection to me. I mean, armed. When you hear of armed, don't you think of firearms? Here's questions I would have liked to ask. How many firearms were confiscated? How many shots were fired? I'm only aware of one, and I'll defend that law enforcement officer for taking that shot. It was a tragedy, okay? But I think there was only one. You know, if that was a planned armed insurrection, man, you're really a bunch of idiots.
Yeah.
Because
I would like to know what pockets of planning did occur versus what was just people that came afterward and thought, oh, the Capitol's open, we're protesting in the Capitol now. Because
yeah, I'd like to know that too, radio guy, which is why there's going to be a 9/11 style commission looking into it, and people like Ron Johnson are going to get theirs. I so hope. All right, here's one more story I wanted to share with you. Came from Axios, but here is CNN's Brianna Keeler talking about Axios' story. Me playing CNN talking about Axios' story, which is, well, here it is.
Major revelation today from President Biden's chief medical advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci. Fauci telling Axios that when he worked under the Trump administration, he worried about personally contracting coronavirus. The Trump White House was known to not enforce mask wearing, of course. Multiple people in Trump's orbit got infected, including the president himself, the first lady, and their son. At 80 years old, Fauci is considered high risk for a severe coronavirus infection.
I think you'd have to be oblivious not to consider the fact that if you get infected, that you are already in a category of someone who has a high risk of having a serious outcome. I didn't fixate on that, but it was in the back of my mind because I had to be out there. I mean, particularly when I was going to the White House every day, when the White House was sort of a super spreader location. I mean, that made me a little bit nervous.
All right. And now time for your coronavirus headlines. Coronavirus headlines. Elementary students in L.A. can return to school, according to health officials. The WHO approved the AstraZeneca Oxford COVID-19 vaccine for emergency use. Coronavirus cases declining across the U.S., but experts urging caution. Israel shines as COVID success story while neighbors in Gaza are left without vaccines. The White House cites deep concerns about WHO COVID report, demands early data from China. The New York State Governor Cuomo administration delayed data on nursing home deaths over fear it was going to be used against us, apparently, and massive scandal that has begun in New York state politics. The U.S. has administered nearly 53 million vaccine doses, and more states are loosening COVID-19 restrictions, but experts warn the country is not yet in the clear. More than 600,000 Americans will have died of the virus by June 1st. 600,000, according to the latest prediction by some prominent forecasting models, and more evidence suggesting the UK variant is linked to more severe disease, researchers say. By the way, I think the UK is pissed that they're calling it the UK variant because it's being called that because they discovered it, because they have good resources and experts to find these variants. And so they found it and discovered it, but it didn't necessarily, I don't think, begin there. It's not like their fault, but it's not good. It's not really great PR, the UK variant. Oh, I hope you don't the UK variants. Ooh. All right. Now it's time for, as you hear that jingle and start to recognize, it means...
If politics and COVID got you feeling like shit, well, perk up with this news dump from Pete Dominic.
Now that one was written by one listener and recorded by another. So now Joe Liotta has written a jingle and Dan recorded it. So maybe just start writing them and send them to Dan, and he can keep recording them since he came up with it to begin with. So basically, it's supposed to be not really political stories and not necessarily COVID-related stories, because that's a lot of what I do in the first segment, but it's other important stories that are undercovered. That is what your news dump is. So let us begin, and we will start in Wyoming, where they have the first black sheriff. Congratulations, Wyoming! Their first black sheriff has been appointed months after fury over racist policing roiled U.S. cities and a shooting there. And his name is Aaron Applehans, and he is the first black sheriff. The new police chief said, I am one of those people who do feel that law enforcement really needs to take a good hard look at what we do. Are we serving our community? There you go, Wyoming. Good work. All right, this is a very important story that the new enrollment window has reopened for health insurance shoppers. Health insurance shoppers stuck in a bad plan or unable to find coverage have a new option for help. Sign-up window open Monday for government insurance markets and runs through May 15th. In most states, it's available for people who don't have coverage through work, and it's expected to make finding a plan less of a hassle for those who lost a job. And guess who benefits from that? Yours truly. So thank you for your subscription. I really appreciate it. All right. And here's the headline at ABC News. Got no milk? Nestle has created a vegan Kit Kat bar. Coming soon to a selected retailer near you, a vegan version of the iconic Kit Kat candy bar. You know, I don't know how you can replace a milk chocolate Kit Kat candy bar, which is already terrible, with something worse. Just saying. Sorry. I'm all for veganism and everything for sure. But I'm not for Kit Kats. That's all I'm saying. I mean, Kit Kats are just that lonely candy bar. Well, they're not lonely. They're with a whole bunch of other ones at the bottom of the Halloween bag because nobody wants them. They just get skipped. They're just skipped over. I'm sorry for my rant. Google has been fined $1 million for misleading French hotel rankings. Google has agreed to pay a fine of 1.1 million euros after French authorities concluded the search engine displayed, quote, misleading rankings for French hotels. In a related story, Google makes $1 million a second. So they're not too concerned about that. I'm sure they won't be changing their behavior on that one. Yeah, just don't click on the top few searches. Come on, learn to do a better search, folks. We all can learn from each other. Got any tips? Let me know. The right-wing friendly Parler app has announced that it's gonna relaunch. It was forced offline following a January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol by supporters of then President Donald Trump, and they say they're relaunching. The Twitter alternative has been struggling to return online since Amazon stripped it of its web hosting service on January 11th over its unwillingness to remove posts inciting violence. Google and Apple then removed Parler's app from their online stores for the same reason, so it's still going to be really hard to get to, and I hope it fails again. But I thought that was an important story to mention. Michael Jordan has given $10 million for North Carolina health clinics. In a related story, a lot of people are saying Michael Jordan makes $10 million a day or something like that. I don't know what it is, but I think that's a good story. I mean, people shouldn't have so much money that they have it to give away, but I'm apparently a Marxist or something. I don't know. I think that's a lot. But anyway, that's good. That's good on Michael Jordan, I guess, right? He needs a PR recovery after that disastrous miniseries, which was amazingly well done, but in my opinion, made him look like a prick. All right, that's it for your news dump today, but I do want to share with you a couple of dispatches. I reached out to a few of my friends, listeners of this podcast that live down in Texas to check in on the weather. First, here's an NBC News correspondent reporting on the weather situation from Texas.
Yeah, Katie, this massive winter system is not only causing problems here in Texas, but all across the entire South. And right now, one of the biggest concerns here across this state is the fact that it's causing an unprecedented drain on the power grid. And that's why early this morning, overnight, in fact, officials went ahead and started installing rolling blackouts all across metropolitan areas in Texas. That meant a lot of folks woke up today, in fact, nearly 2 million in the dark, in the cold, trying to figure out how they were going to stay warm. Now, in order to combat that, we do know warming shelters were opened up in major cities across Texas and elsewhere. But for those who did get out on the roads, they faced incredibly treacherous conditions. We've seen countless accidents play out on the highways that not only have snow, but a level of ice underneath them. All of this unlikely to go away anytime soon, with Texas remaining, at least this part in Dallas, in single digits for perhaps the next 24 hours. As it stands right now, the governor asking everyone here to please conserve power, turn that thermostat down, even if it's just by a few degrees. That will enable them to hopefully fully restore the grid sooner than later.
Yeah, crazy shit down there. My cousin in Dallas, Kristen, texted me and said, crazy cold. It's up to 7 degrees at the moment, but even crazier, losing power all night. These rolling power outages that have been going on all day. I literally have to plug in lights and candles all over just waiting for the next rolling power outage. The minute you get into something, everything shuts down again. I'm wearing 3 layers of clothes and I become Linus with a blanket, dragging one around, but feeling grateful for the adventure of it all. And here is our friend Tina Winsett with her dispatch. I checked in with her.
Hey, Pete, it's Tina Winsett calling you from, I'm just south of Austin, Texas. We've had crazy, for us, winter weather here the last 24 hours. Woke up to no power this morning. The high today was 20, 22. Crazy wind chills. We got 4 inches of snow. It was so cold in my house at one point that literally the metal frames of my windows had ice on the inside. So we finally got power back here tonight, but it looks like Austin's got a whole lot of people out. So yeah, winter in the South is a whole nother animal. Nobody hears, the houses aren't built for it. It just was kind of crazy all day, but all good for now. We're just crossing our fingers. We have power for the night. Take care.
Thank you, Tina. Always good to hear from you. And here is my friend Cornell Woolridge, also a listener, a longtime listener, subscriber, his dispatch from near Austin.
Hey, Pete. This is Cornell. It is about 9:44 Central Standard Time. It has been a crazy day as far as this weather here in just the whole state of Texas, but certainly Austin, where at last count there was about 50% of the residents without power. There's no idea yet when we're going to get that back on. The hope is that'll be on for tomorrow, but we're not sure. And the same is going on in Houston, going on in Dallas-Fort Worth, going on in San Antonio. A big part of the state is without power and has been for at least most of the day. And there just haven't been a whole lot of answers as to why this is. There are no ideas of rolling blackouts that people are going to do, but that idea got scrapped, I'd say probably about an hour or so in, because at least here in Austin, the reason they couldn't do rolling blackouts is because the way the hospitals are set up along the grid, there are enough hospitals kind of in enough different grids that if they were to do rolling blackouts, some hospital would get hit. And so they just tried to find areas that weren't close to hospitals, which includes where I live, and just black those out. So we've been without power since 4:30 in the morning. And so right now we're actually, I believe we're at 18 hours without power. Fortunately, we have gas, so we've actually been able to do okay with our fireplace and stuff like that. But there's a lot of people who don't have access to gas, who don't have electricity, who are just making it somehow. And I don't know how they're making it, but it's pretty rough down here. And, not to go here, but quite a bit of this has to do with the fact that Texas actually has its own grid system because it was trying to escape federal regulations with being on a national grid. And so because of that, Texas, and I just found this out today, Texas actually requires federal declarations of emergency for natural disasters more than any other state in the country. And that is because it has its own grid system. And likely that grid system is not comprehensive. It obviously is not able to deal with, 2-3 days of intense cold. And that's why, we're all in this situation that we're in. So I'm hoping this gets better here pretty soon. But we're actually supposed to be getting another system, a smaller system, but another system, I think Tuesday night through Thursday morning. So supposed to get another maybe inch to 2 or 3 inches of snow, maybe another, 1/10 to a quarter of an inch of ice. So I don't know. The hits keep coming. And we're all going to do what we can to make it through. Hope you all are well. And talk to you later, man. Bye-bye.
All right. And that is Cornell Woolridge. And both of them, I'll link to their Twitter handles in the show notes. And great, awesome people. And I want to do more of that. So whether it be a natural disaster or an issue, a protest, or something else that you have a point of view on and you want to leave me a brief message like that, under 3 minutes, under a minute, I'd always like to hear it. And like I said, this is our show. We can put anything we want on it. And if you get something smart and thoughtful to say or report, I'd love to hear from you as we build this community together. And now it's time to get to my first guest. I'm already almost 34 minutes into the podcast, and I haven't even gotten to a guest. I'm sorry, but you can always fast forward, skip ahead if you want. Never know how much to do, but I put as much out there as I can. I got two great guests joining me today. First, I wanted to talk with somebody who is covering, studying, analyzing the type of domestic extremism we saw on Insurrection Day and in the years building up to it. There's been far more white supremacist, anti-government, right-wing attacks than any kind of other foreign attack or left-wing attack of any sort. And so there's a great young group of journalists and analysts that are now following these extremists, especially online. and that's exactly who my first guest is. He's not been on the show before, but a lot of people talking about the report that he and the Atlantic Council put together chronicling the insurrection and everything that led up to it. He is a resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, where he oversees domestic extremism and research. He's got a great podcast called the HuffPost podcast. He's on Twitter at Jared Holt. He also has a Substack, shtpost.substack.com. And the audio is a little off. These first 5 minutes, there was some kind of ping on the connection, but I do make an adjustment and switch to a different audio source, and it's better. It's not perfect, but it rarely is. Sometimes it is. Working on that all the time to make it the best I can. But here now is my conversation with Jared Holt, and coming up right after that, Anushay Hossain. All right, there's Jared now, and I'm psyched to have you on the show. I've been reading all of your work, as well as now subscribing to your Substack, and excited to ask you questions. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
So talk a little bit about your beat and the issues and type of people that you cover, and if you want, how you cover them, because it's tough. The work that you do is really challenging because of who you talk to and what you have to learn and see, but it's so important, and I'm so happy that you do it and I get to talk to you about it. What is this work that you do, this beat that you cover?
Yeah, so for probably the last 4 or 5 years now, I've been covering domestic extremism in the U.S., so most often that takes the form of covering right-wing extremism because it has this long, storied, deadly history in the country. It's also, was able to achieve a level of national prominence during the Trump era. People may argue what role Trump specifically had in that and how much of it was a reaction to the Obama era, but that's neither here nor there. The fact is this had an outsized influence for the past 4 years and grew and sort of mainstreamed itself in ways that we hadn't really seen before. So what I do, and kind of my specialty I've developed over the years, is trying to cut, the line where this violent extremism and this sort of far-right online ecosystem, how it, mingles together, where it intersects, where it doesn't, and, the way they influence one another.
Yeah, and you do a great job at it. But when you look at kind of this beat that you cover that you just described, I feel like there's not enough coverage. There's not enough people doing what you and many of your colleagues are doing to cover domestic extremism, domestic terrorism. And when you think about the issue of terrorism, we've been thinking mostly about foreign terrorism for our whole lives, I think. But there have been a lot of people at different, from Right Wing Watch to where you work, to Southern Poverty Law Center, to obviously, parts of the FBI, depending on who's in charge, and other national security agencies. But I feel like there's not nearly enough coverage in proportion to the threat that it poses. What do you think about that in terms of the way that it gets covered and the amount of attention and resources that get paid to this threat?
There's a lot of places that do great work on this. Like you mentioned, the Southern Poverty Law Center, Right Wing Watch, where I was before I moved to the Atlantic Council to do this in more of a research academic lens, like I have for the past few months. And there are definitely resources out there to learn about this. There are people who dedicate their careers to watching this, observing this, thinking about this. But generally speaking, I feel like, there's been a lot of coverage of this stuff, especially since the attack on the Capitol, or like in the wake of Unite the Right in Charlottesville in 2017. There was this flood of coverage on it. But a lot of this coverage, I feel like, is kind of missing the forest through the trees, right? It's, they focus really hard on QAnon, or they focus really hard on Proud Boys, or they focus really hard on the Oath Keepers or militias or something. And, it's important to focus on those individual things, right? Because, to make the puzzle, you have to understand where the pieces fall, right? But I feel like, since it's CNN or something that's talking to a general audience, there's a lot of kind of subtext in the room that isn't being said. I feel like the elephant in the room is that the GOP, over the course of many years, allowed itself to become completely compromised by these forces. The fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene, a QAnon believer got elected to Congress should have been, the flare shot straight up into the air, right? Focusing on these groups is important because, often they're the ones engaging in violence or the ones, wrecking the most harm. But these groups don't exist in a vacuum. And that's kind of where I think a lot of media is missing the point. But it's also a double-edged sword, right? Because any sort of media attention that these extremist groups get, they will often try to spin and use it to recruit or use it to boost their visibility or their perception of influence. So it's a very, very fine balancing act there.
Is there an example that comes to mind or type of thing that media does where they take advantage, the extremist group takes advantage to use it as a recruiting tool? Because I've always been torn about simple things like saying the name of the shooter, much less giving them too much attention or a profile. Are there any examples of how they use the media attention and turn it into a recruiting tool?
Yeah, and recently it's been kind of interesting because they've been using negative media attention to try to recruit. So any kind of news article, for example, that is very hyperbolic or covers like some very small going on within their movement, they are able to balloon up and use it to make this argument that, we are such a threat to the establishment. We are such a threat to the, conspiracy of news media and politicians and whatever, that they think that this stupid little thing we said or this joke we made was so important and deserved a news article. And, I think the easiest way to beat that is probably just discretion, right? It's remembering the big picture here. And if something happens and it's it's just something stupid that can get thrown away, maybe you don't write an article on it. Or maybe you have to approach these topics with the nuance they demand so that you're not just, needlessly trying to scare people or something. I get that gets clicks and is sexy headlines, but it's really irresponsible in terms of covering this stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of hard if you're going to be in mainstream media at like a New York Times or CNN and you're going to cover domestic extremists to do it with the kind of delicacy and discretion that you just described and still get people to watch and get ratings and sell advertising and so on. Nonetheless, that is ethically, I think that's a good ethical approach to it that you're describing. How much?
Yeah, and I will say, I'll cut in with the nuance here that over time, this has gotten better, right? There are people at the Times, there's people at the Washington Post, etc., that do really good work on these topics. But unfortunately, that, the nuance and detail that, those specific reporters might bring to the beat, bring to the subject, hasn't always translated throughout the broader newspaper. So, you get a really great reporter covering extremism, and then you get some op-ed columnist who just makes a complete ass of themselves trying to explain this stuff, right? So it's not that understanding, that detail, that granularity really needs to become part of the institutional knowledge, and we're not really seeing a whole lot of indications that is yet the case.
Well, that's exactly, though, what you're doing, that granularity, which is why I'm really happy to be talking to you, because that kind of work is so important, so necessary right now. But I think that for a lot of different reasons that we could talk about, that journalists are way ahead of government when it comes to domestic extremism, especially. And we can talk about why that might be, including that there might be some sympathizers at different law enforcement agencies or at different levels of government. The local state government sometimes in certain states isn't too far away from what the Oath Keepers believe, what the Bundy brothers believe and are doing and so on. But journalists and investigative journalists like yourself who cover this stuff, you see the threat, you see the players, you know their names, and you even engage with them. So let me ask you more specifically about your work there, and then we'll talk about why government needs to catch up or how they can. What do you call, when you're engaging in different forums, extremists yourself? Like when you're trying to learn about them or engage with them, what is that? How do you do that? Why do you do that?
So most of my most of the approach I do in going to different forum boards, chat rooms, that sort of stuff, I'm just observing because I don't want to compromise the integrity of my work.
Got it.
I want to be able to come out of those spaces and be able to say what I observed in an empirical way without having to issue any kind of disclaimer that like I was part of the conversation or I had guided conversation or something. But and then whenever I engage in these spaces, I always make sure to be very upfront about who I am, what I'm doing, that sort of thing.
It's great, the ethics that you approach it with, and unfortunately, most people don't. But what would be wrong with you, pretending to be somebody who you're not, to ask a question, to get, their answer on it for your own reporting? That's not an ethical way to engage someone to try to learn more about their cause in this case?
If you're intending to solicit material that you're later going to publish without disclosing your identity, there's very few exceptions where that is ethical. Because subjects, under journalism ethics should have a right to reply. They should have, you should be reaching out to people that are mentioned in your story. It gives them the chance to respond, and two, it's also just good journalism.
Right.
You might learn something else. Right?
I appreciate the hell of what you're describing, how you act as a journalist, because I think that's what I'm always trying to explain to listeners and to audiences. Like, we have to know what our sources are, and we have to know how they behave and how they approach a story. And if they have an editor, and if they issue corrections, and if they do unethical things, then they're not people that we should be drawing information from, much less our conclusions. So I that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to talk to someone like yourself. But going back to the question about what government knows and when they know it and how they react to it, it feels like the whole insurrection, the whole Stop the Steal thing took a lot of law enforcement by surprise. And then there's people like you and others who have been watching this extremist movement and were not surprised at all because it was like a concert. It was promoted for that date. How did you not know that? So the conclusion that I come to is that they're just they're not keeping up. They're not doing their work. They don't see in the threat matrix that domestic extremism is nearly as dangerous and influential as it is, and they don't resource it and they don't watch it. Meanwhile, journalists like yourself are. What's your take, though? Are there a lot of good people, and is it resourced well enough at every level of government?
I don't think it's resourced very well. The unfortunate fact of the matter is, throughout my years of working on this topic, is that a lot of law enforcement and federal agencies rely on people like myself to know what is going on. And really that seems like something they should also be doing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you next. How often do you contact them and ask them what they're seeing? And what you're telling me is they contact you and ask you what you're seeing.
Yeah, sometimes. And sometimes it goes the other way too. Ultimately I do this work because I want people to be safe and everything. So, I am skeptical of this idea that federal law enforcement or even local law enforcement was unaware of the threats that were, coming towards the Capitol on January 6th. A lot of it was happening online in plain sight where anybody, could just type it in and go look for it. What I think instead it kind of shows is there remains this disconnect in law enforcement and in national security between, understanding that online disinformation, conspiracy theories, extremism, and real life consequence, those are bridged. You can't really separate the two anymore. The same way that, I don't know about you, but I've got, one of these little phones in my pocket that I, check way too many times a day. And, the same way that I'm connected to that, so are all of these different extremists from those movements, right? So, the online and the offline the line is more blurred than it's ever been. And if there's threats happening online, I think that if you're in law enforcement, you kind of have to assume that at least to some degree, some of that will spill off in some form or another. And I think that, perhaps, assuming they were aware of what was happening online, it would be pretty hard not to be. Maybe they just didn't think it was that big of a deal, or that, they chalked it up to just people talking shit on the internet, right? But something I've been kind of on my soapbox about recently is that, a lot of it is shit talking on the internet, right? But, we have to take it seriously and treat it seriously and try to suss out whatever real threats might be there.
But I talked to Ali Soufan a couple weeks ago. Are you familiar with his work? Ali Soufan, former FBI agent, the Soufan Group. He's mostly covered the jihadist threat, the extremist threat from foreign nations, and now he has talked so much about the resources that need to now be focused on the main threat, and it does, which is domestic extremism, which is what you cover. And it's hard to quantify what's the greatest threat. But it would seem clear that domestic terrorism is the greatest threat to American national security by the way that we traditionally look at national security. So my question to you, Jared, is how should it be looked at? How much of a threat it is? What do you see and hear with these many different fragmented yet in some ways solidarity movements?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think domestic extremism is a greater threat to, the stability and future of the United States. It's more of a threat, I think, than any sort of active foreign threat at this point. Certainly disinformation, like our domestic disinformation outlets, the, crazy conspiratorial blogs and whatnot that get passed around the internet and shared in the hundreds of thousands. That's more influence than any kind of Russian bot activity could ever dream to achieve. And we do it here, we do it in-house, and we do it to ourselves, right? And the same thing goes with extremism. As much as any sort of foreign entity would want to stoke extremism in this country to further divisions and further hostility in the United States, we're just doing it ourselves for some reason. One thing that, we should be doing, something I've been stressing to people is that, we don't need to extend surveillance powers. We don't need to give up civil liberties. And a lot of the, counter violent extremism programs that went into place after 9/11, it turned out from the government's own reporting that they couldn't find evidence it ever, prevented a terrorist attack. And instead it just really came down hard on Muslim communities for, seemingly no gain. So
potentially causing more damage, creating more of a recruiting tool for Muslim communities as they see. You say no gain, but in some ways it could be seen as a lot of damage. The countering terrorism techniques or programs that you're talking about may have done more harm than good is what I'm trying to say. Arguable. But yeah, so anyway, given government's you're saying we don't need new laws, we don't need these domestic threats, we don't need to compromise civil liberties. What do we need to do?
We need to prioritize it. The fact of the matter is a lot of extremist groups engage in activity that is already illegal. Like, for example, militia activity, paramilitary action. When militia goes out in the street during a protest and starts to police the protest with guns, in nearly every state that is illegal. You could arrest them right there on the spot. If they're in a compound,
I'm sorry, you're talking about a Black Lives Matter rally. People are in the streets peacefully protesting Black Lives Matter, and there are these guys who look like they're Navy SEALs, but they're not, and may not even be able to make it up a flight of stairs. But the point is, that's a scenario you're talking about when there's kind of I don't know what you want to label it, but a movement that they don't agree with, and they're there. Is that what you mean? Those types of guys? Or you mean the MAGA movement and they're all just around that? What are you saying is illegal?
I mean the joke, the MEAL Team 6 commandos, right?
I love it.
Yeah, the fact that what I'm getting at is that these militia groups, several of which were present in that attack on the Capitol, forming a group, arming yourself up to the teeth, dressing up in tactical gear, and then trying to function as an extension or some sort of private military service or law enforcement service is against the law. So you can just crack down on all those groups. A lot of, doxing in many forms is illegal, inciting harassment, that's not legal. You know, there's like so many different avenues and so many different behaviors that these groups engage in that just flagrantly violate the law. What really needs to happen is we need to take this seriously, treat it as a priority, and use the systems we have in place. And we have a lot of systems and a lot of capabilities at our hands to enforce this stuff, and you know, bring some accountability into extremist movements in a way that hasn't existed for the last 5 years.
Well, it hasn't existed in the domestic extremist movements, right? It has existed in the forms, and I want to just try to water this down, and you can punch back if you think it's if there's no nuance here. But when I think a lot about the surveillance that the FBI and NYPD Terrorism Task Force did on mosques, the infiltration that they did, the listening devices, all of it, the renting of the apartment across, just watching mosques all the time, because maybe there's a guy there, maybe there's 1 or 2 guys there, maybe there's a cell, 4 or 5 guys at that mosque. Yeah, it's possible that there are bad actors at that mosque, but it's not the whole mosque. But they still they spend all kinds of resources and time watching these guys, listening to these guys, infiltrating their groups. In the meantime, there's a bunch of fucking guys meeting up at a barn in Michigan, and they're not hiding. They're in plain sight. And we're not listening to them. We're not infiltrating them. We're not doing anything, because politically it's always been fraught with danger because of Ruby Ridge and because they're white and because they're whatever they are. But they fucking attacked the capital of Michigan before they did the national capital. They're not hiding. And so all this attention paid to Muslims and all those resources dedicated because maybe there's a couple guys. Meantime, we know exactly where these guys are, and they're meeting and they're training. And it feels like they're not being watched. They're not being infiltrated. They're not being held accountable. So I'm done talking. But am I simplifying the way that they use their resources with, foreign or Muslim Americans versus these militia guys, the Oath Keepers in the middle of nowhere?
I think that's pretty fair. Yeah, there has been an abundance of resources, an abundance of manpower put on this, war against terror that,
right.
debatably hasn't really produced much as far as results. And, these domestic extremist groups have just kind of been able to flourish in the U.S. In the last couple of years, the DOJ has cracked down on Boogaloo members who had built pipe bombs or neo-Nazi prison gangs and stuff like that. But those are kind of blips along the road. Again, it's picking out little pieces, but missing the bigger picture here. Joe Biden and his administration have claimed that this is going to be a priority, that, they're going to assess this and try to retool the approach to confront domestic extremism. A lot of that remains to be seen, but I think, keeping the pressure there and keeping the priority there, will be important. If Biden does follow through on that, I'm going to be interested to see what the future looks like and see if that changes at all.
There's just so much, billions of dollars at the Department of Homeland Security, which I think oversees ATF, FBI, and pretty much all of them. And so much of it is resourced in the wrong ways and the wrong targets, when in fact all the people that you're covering are who we should be watching and listening to. You have published at the Atlantic Council potentially the most comprehensive timeline of extremist activities leading up to 1/6, the insurrection. Of course, that's linked in today's episode, and everybody should read it. It's fascinating. And one question is, I wonder how much different it is, or if you are working at all with anybody in the Democrat impeachment managers, because they also established a timeline that they've laid out this past week. But my question to you is, when you watch this extremist group and you document this timeline, what is the conclusion that you come to about how well-resourced, well-trained, and how much of a threat that they really are, and how we quantify that? Because I watched every single video that was taken that I could get my hands on. I watched them. I'm sure you watched them and wrote about them and researched them all. And what I came away with was, wow, what a massive amount of disorganization. There's all these different threads and strains, the MAGA people, the Oath Keepers, and you've talked about them and you're an expert on all of them. But they seemed like they were almost in competition. Guy was yelling in a megaphone, everybody sit down and be quiet. He's part, one of the insurrectionists. Everybody's just looking at him like, shut the fuck up, move out of the way. Like nobody was leading. How well organized are they? How much of a threat are they? Do you think the best way to talk about how well equipped, trained, and eager they are to do real damage? Because a lot of these guys are like, do they really want to go to jail?
Yeah, it varies a lot, right? Extremism, like any other political issue, on the healthcare debate, for example, there's people, left of center that want, an extension of Obamacare. There's people who want free healthcare. There's a whole spectrum of ideas, right? And absolutely not to conflate the two, but just to illustrate the point, a spectrum also exists in extremism. So there are, militia groups, sort of neo-Nazi groups, terror cells that are very organized. And then there's sort of broader movements. I agree that once they did get into the Capitol, it kind of seemed like there wasn't anybody really leading. The hero of the day, and it's kind of a shame he got arrested, in my opinion, is the guy who got into the rotunda and then lit up a joint. That guy, Joe Biden should pardon that guy just because that was...
I didn't hear about that guy.
Oh, yeah. There was a guy, I think it was the rotunda, or maybe it's the little thing under the rotunda. Funny. It's just like, blaze up, dude. We're storming the Capitol.
If it wasn't so terrible, that would be, as a comedian, it's been so hard because I want to write so many jokes about it. But the funniest thing was absolutely these very angry people walking into the Capitol, clearly for the first time going, holy shit. Where am I? Like, did you forget why you're there? Come on, smash, Hulk.
Yeah, I mean, there were people in there that definitely wanted to, kill people, right? They were in the group, but then there was also just this, huge conglomerate of people that I think were just excited at the idea of storming the Capitol and then got inside and were just like, all right, so I guess we'll just look around now. Yeah. One of my favorite videos was, the people in the rotunda marching through the rotunda, these insurrectionists, right? Staying inside the velvet ropes as they go through the rotunda. Once they got inside, it was there was no leadership, there was no anything. There were specific little groups and cells actively going out looking. So we saw the DOJ claim in some charging documents that I guess some people were getting communications of where members of Congress were in the safe rooms and that sort of thing. So there's some very, very terrifying stuff going on, but it's all of that was happening under the cover of this just totally almost cartoonish situation where you had everybody from college kids lighting up joints to violent extremists all together in one place.
So given all that and given what you have been paying such close attention to, and I'll wrap it up here, even though I could talk to you forever because this is such an important issue and you know it so well. Where do you think, I'm not going to ask you to make a prediction, but as you are an analyst of this movement, and so where are they, given that the goal was to stop the steal and they failed? They still believe, and I do have compassion for this, that the election was stolen. I understand why someone would be angry if they believe that someone murdered their wife. But if no one murdered their wife, then they shouldn't have to worry about it. The election wasn't stolen. They still believe it. And Joe Biden is now the president. And Donald Trump, I think this is so important, doesn't have Twitter as their leader. So where is the movement? How do you even talk about it, Jared, where this movement is right now? And I do kind of want to ask you where you think they're going to go, but maybe you don't want to give any kind of analysis on that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, currently, I track this stuff on a daily basis. Every single day, I start my day by going to the worst parts of the internet and finding all these people saying, "Hey, what's up, buddy? There's my guys right there." And
I want to ride along with you one day.
Just checking in on the conversation, right? And kind of getting a temperature check for what's going on. And since the attack on the Capitol, initially they were all so pumped about it. They were like, this is the first shot in a revolution, baby. And then people started getting arrested, and Trump sort of was like, yeah, you guys should all be arrested, peace out, and ducked out of the public spotlight. And obviously Joe Biden was inaugurated, is like, you know, they thought they were doing this for Trump, right? And then Trump just sort of bailed. And, like, nothing they did really accomplished anything except getting, I think it's nearly 200 people arrested at this point. And I'm sure there will be more. And so they're just kind of in this, like, state of flux right now. So they had hedged so many bets on this idea that Trump was going to remain the president and that, you know, this was going to be the start of some bigger thing. Right. But now they're just kind of like infighting a lot, bickering at the TV. They're going full in on culture war stuff, which is sort of their bread and butter. Yeah. You know, getting mad at the TV, getting mad at people who are canceled or whatever.
Stuff. Yeah.
And like, it seems very aimless at the moment. But something, you know, like I want to remind people, and well, I guess maybe not remind if they're not, if they don't do this work, but extremist movements like do this periodically. You know, they tend to go through this life cycle of coalescing around something, building momentum. They do something. It's an extremist movement, so inevitably, like the second they try to do something big, it's a PR nightmare. Something goes terribly wrong. People die, etc. And then it sort of scatters apart, reforms in little pieces, and then comes back together again. And it just goes through this life cycle, like roller coaster, up and down. And right now, we're like at the bottom of the hill on the roller coaster. And, you know, I can't make any predictions on what it's going to look like when it goes back up the hill.
Yeah.
But it will go back up the hill, is the point. Like, even
without
without
Trump being able to effectively, it feels like he can't effectively lead without social media, that he's been deplatformed. Is it inevitable that it goes back up, though, without him?
I think it'll go back up, yeah, without him. You know, even if it's not Trump, I'm sure like some other politician will take its figure. You know, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, whoever the hell does it. You know, like there will be another Trump, and I'm kind of worried like what is going to happen if we don't get this issue tackled before, you know, the next Trump. Because I just wonder like how much worse it could have been if this was being directed by somebody who was even maybe like 5% more competent than Trump.
Well, that's why I always bank on and root for the next Trump being Eric.
Yeah.
Jared, thank you very much. Really enjoyed talking to you and love reading your work and excited to be a subscriber to your Substack and the podcast and all the links to that in the show notes. And everybody has to read your really important, comprehensive report on the whole Stop the Steal timeline. It's so great. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, that is Jared Holt at the Atlantic Council, focused on domestic extremism and the internet. His podcast is a Shitpost podcast, and he check out his Substack. Follow him on Twitter at Jared Holt. Really great analysis. You definitely should read his stuff. And now I am excited to bring on my second guest of today's program. I so enjoyed, and so did so many of you, our first conversation here on the podcast. It was more than time to get her back. She is a journalist, an author, a writer, an activist, and a mom, and a really interesting, smart, funny woman who I love talking to. You can listen to her podcast, Spilling Chai. Follow her on Twitter at Anushay Hossain. Here is my second ever recorded conversation with the brilliant Anushay Hossain. I'm very excited to be talking to you again because the first time you joined me, everybody loved it. They said it was like listening to two old friends. And that's how I think we both felt, like we became automatic friends after that first discussion. It's great to have you back. Thank you for joining me again.
Thanks so much for having me, Pete. You're so popular. It took me so long to be invited back.
Oh, yeah. It's
in between all your other famous friends. Little people.
You never know how often you can ask someone to join you for free on your podcast. I feel like, because you don't want to take advantage of anybody, but at the same time, I want to say to somebody like, please come on every week, but you don't want to, take advantage. That's my thing.
That's a really great question though, because what is the answer to that? How often can you ask people? I feel like for podcasts, it can be forever.
people have different needs and time constraints, right? Like if you're trying to get more attention for whatever, even if you're a big deal, well, you're going to come join me for the book, but are you going to come join me next week? It's always a delicate balance. I try to be respectful of it. But speaking of new books, you have just turned your book in, and I'm sure from what I hear, based on people who do such things and write books that they put a lot of their life and time into, it's a huge undertaking. So congratulations. We talked a little bit about it last time, but in case people didn't hear that, what is your book about?
So my book is about how sexism and really racism in healthcare kills women in America. But I feel like every other book before my upcoming book really kind of creates this image of women's health in America and motherhood in America, this face of a white woman, right? But all the statistics and the stories really tell a different story. And that's what my upcoming book, Hysterical, How Sexism in Healthcare Kills Women. It's forthcoming from Simon & Schuster this fall, October 12th, 2021, is about. But I will say that I'm so scared to talk about it because I feel like I just turned in my manuscript. Like, I hope my editors don't come back and tell me it's like a piece of crap and they don't want it anymore.
Well, I'm glad that's what your fear is. I thought you were going to say something worse, which was you're concerned to talk about it because it deals with gender, and you've never been afraid to talk about that, of course. But
no, not at all.
Let's have a conversation about gender as it relates to healthcare. I always want to talk about that issue, and let's start by saying a lot of people don't want to talk about it. I mean, especially men. What do you say to somebody who is exhausted with the conversation about gender and sexual differences and misogyny and toxic masculinity? Because there are some people that will hear that somebody is a gender studies major or has written a book like yours.
Feminist, and they're like, "Ugh, God, stop bitching." Are we allowed to cuss on your show, Chris?
Yeah, say anything you want, but I just feel like it's like, I always feel uncomfortable kind of talking about it too, because people will always say I'm being virtuous by even talking about it. You're like, I'm trying to get women to like me and stuff like that. And it's just, I think it's a discussion that we have to constantly have. So what do you say to those types of accusations and questions and exhaustions?
You know, I think I would say to those people is that they don't know what I'm actually talking about. And when you start actually understanding, I think people feel like they think they know what someone is talking about when we bring up not necessarily gender, but like women's rights or feminism, because it has a terrible reputation as, you know, women whining or like women complaining. But I think that in itself says a lot. I think the misunderstanding says a lot, and it turns off a lot of men. But I also think that is really changing. Really, really changing. And this book isn't about, oh my God, we're treated so unfairly, and this is what you guys have to do. I mean, this book is going to be an education for women too. And I think one of the biggest examples I can bring up of why, one of the big things my book talks about and why my book is so relevant right now is what just happened with the COVID vaccine and the pandemic. We have this unseen, you know, unimaginable plague, really, that has crippled, you know, one of the most powerful countries in the world and the whole world. And we've also seen how women in many ways are in the front lines for that, not because they are more likely to get infected with COVID, but because they make up 70% of healthcare workers, right? And also about over 70% of those healthcare workers are in the reproductive age. But then guess what happened with this vaccine? Perhaps the most anticipated vaccine of our lifetime was tested on everybody but women, but pregnant women. And everybody was kind of like, we cannot test on women because of the fetus, of their unborn child. But apparently the NIH was not even legally mandated or required to test on women until 1993. So women have been systematically secluded from critical vaccine trials and clinical trials really since forever. And even though from 1993, they started being required to be included, today we're in 2020 even. They were not included in these trials, despite a lot of women saying, hey, we want to be included in these trials, a lot of pregnant women. And now the CDC and the World Health Organization are kind of giving out conflicting advice, but the vaccine's been out for 2 or 3 months. So we've basically tested on an uncontrolled group of pregnant women. But nobody wanted to test them in a controlled environment. So it's a lot of these things. And the reason that the book is called Hysterical, is because how long, since the dawn of time, have women been being dismissed about our pain, our symptoms, if something is wrong, that we're emotional, that we're crazy, that we're hysterical. And hysteria was actually the first official mental health disorder attributed to women. So it's all about how it started and how relevant it still is to this day. And even though it has a lot to do with women's health, I think people forget that women's health has a lot to do with everybody's health, right?
Of course.
Our family's health, our health. Everyone's like, oh, women's health, gynecology, it's awkward.
I mean, the cost of, if you're completely insensitive, the cost of care. I mean, like we can talk about the cost of women's health care, postnatal, whatever we want to talk about. You know, they live longer than men for some reason. Why do you think that is?
C-sections being the most common and invasive surgery in America. And also, nobody talks about this because everyone's like, oh, just have a C-section. But it's a major surgery. You know, I had 2 and I almost died in my first one. And nobody ever told me that it was a major surgery. And another interesting thing about my book is because I'm writing this now I'm American, but I was born and raised in Bangladesh. And when I was growing up, Bangladesh had one of the highest maternal mortality rates, in the world. And the people who came in and kind of introduced public health to Bangladesh, and contraception and educating women, all of this came from USAID. And today, Bangladesh has slashed the maternal mortality by 40%, and America is the industrialized country in the world with the highest rates. And why do we care about women dying in childbirth? Like, what does that say? It's terrible. It shouldn't be happening. But what is it an indicator of? It's an indicator of women's overall position in society. It's an indicator of how well your healthcare system is functioning. Women have been giving birth since the dawn of time. Why are they dying in childbirth? And that number is rising every year in the richest country on earth.
Right. And that's the point. I mean, in the richest country on earth. And what does that signify? And I think the statistics overwhelmingly skew based on socioeconomics as well. You're more likely to have major issues the less money that you have, that you earn. The point is, that is kind of a moral representation of what's wrong with your country's healthcare system. I think a lot of health policy experts start with that, maternal mortality rates, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, it's always a walk in the garden with me, Pete. I'm like, let's talk white supremacy, maternal mortality. I don't know what else. Criminal murder.
We make it fun. You make it fun. Us together make it. It's important. It's important to talk about these. We can talk about.
Important. It is so important. And also, I think people are shocked. I think you and I, we live in America. Maybe we knew some stuff, but the world is shocked what they have seen in COVID in America.
But let's get to I want to get to the kind of the root of the problem that you think that the topic of conversation that you're an expert on, that you've written this book about, has. I mean, you were on Tucker Carlson's show a couple of times, and he is like one of the leaders. Twice, yeah. He's like one of the leaders of this kind of ideology. And people keep talking about the Proud Boys as a racist or white supremacist group. But I know the people who created it. I know people that identify in that group. They're overwhelmingly male supremacists is what they are. I mean, they have Hispanic people in their thing. That's why it's boys. Their things about masculinity and being a tough guy. And by the way, all a Proud Boy is the same guy who just wants to go out and get drunk and literally looking for a fight. Those guys have always been around, and I have never understood that inspiration, but that's who they are. They're male supremacists. And so when we're talking about this whole generation of media influencers, not to mention the former president and so many that support him, this male supremacy that is so also, in line with white supremacy, we just don't talk nearly enough, in my opinion, about the gender inequity and the thoughts behind it. Do you ever have a conversation that convinces these guys who believe in that type of ideology, or even women, that changes their mind, that opens their mind? How do we have that conversation with them? Where does it start?
I feel like I have once or twice, but the more I got into my work, the less it started being about, there's some people who don't want to be convinced and some people who are genuinely interested in what you have to say. I think in the early days of my commentator work, when I was on air a lot, that you really kind of get into that because it's once, right? They have one guest saying one thing and another guest saying another thing. Right. You want to be the one who wins the debate. But increasingly now I'm seeing
women, should they work? Yes or no? Outside the home.
Brown women, should they have a voice? No, shut up. No, it is like, honestly, it is like that. I mean, that Tucker Carlson segment really became, but John Mayer wrote a love song. And at the time, I think his girlfriend was Jennifer Love Hewitt, right? Was that her name from Party of Five and everything? That's who he wrote that song for. I don't know why that's the hill that Tucker wanted to die on.
Bizarre.
So bizarre. But a lot of the serious stuff really comes down to race. And I think it's very difficult to talk about race in America. I mean, some days I'm like, I don't want to talk about it anymore. It's so hard. And, you know, I've even had really hard conversations with my friends and my oldest, like college friends where I'm like, that is offensive.
Like what?
And they'll be like, oh, that's not offensive. Like, you know what, I'm glad you asked me that. I feel like the Capitol riots that we just saw were seen very differently from white people and people of color. And I'm increasingly seeing this. I was traumatized. Not only was that happening like 20 minutes away from where I live, plus I'm Washingtonian. Like, I love DC. I've been here like forever. I've been here for like 20 years. My dad went to Georgetown. Like, we love Washington, D.C. And now my family, my cats and my kids are here. My husband loves D.C. I really thought it was the end of the world. Like, I had never seen something like that in my life. Like, I hadn't even seen something like that bad in Bangladesh. I was talking to my dad about how if you had tried to enter the Bangladesh parliament like that, like, they would have just shot everybody. But I also think that if those people that day on January 6th were not white, that's probably very likely what would have happened. I mean, I think if there were Muslims or black people trying to do that, forget it.
If they were Asian, I mean, like, I always think about, I think about that stupid movie, like Olympus Has Fallen or something, where it's like the villain is North Koreans and they raid the White House. And it's like just the most brutal, violent, bloody fight because, of course. And then I think of like how the Q shaman guy was sitting there talking to a Capitol policeman. And I think it was Steve Schmidt who said on Real Time the other night, he should have shot him. And I am not someone who believes in violence or police violence or shooting, but like the idea of where we are at in America and the type of police violence that occurs, it's just so hard for people to make the point that you made and prove this negative, that if it were black people, if it were Muslim people, and have others believe it, but it always needs to be, of course they would have shot them or brutalized them.
And I used to lobby on the Hill. That was like before I started, like, before I went full time with my writing. That's what I did. That was like my real job. And let me tell you, you try to cross the street on freaking like North Capitol. The Capitol Police are one of the best funded police departments in the country. You get shouted at if you even move 1 foot before it's like, Oh,
I rented one of those electric scooters that you have there in DC, and I was racing around. I always forget to mention this. I was racing around the Capitol, and Capitol policeman's like, "Take it easy, buddy." And I was like, "Sorry, my scooter too fast." And yet, I mean, the reaction to these guys, it's
crazy. But I had a very good friend who's a prominent figure in the media that I just want to die. Like, I don't know if I can be friends with this person anymore, because it was described to me by this person as a security breach and that I was overreacting. And I was just like, that is crazy. I mean, I don't think that people, I don't know. I mean, I think people of color associated white mob violence with like lynchings of the past. And there was a noose on the fucking Capitol. So pardon my French. So I think that,
yeah, and the way that they saw it, Stacey Pleskett made that great speech, and other commentators have pointed out as well, is like all these white people rioted and are totally guilty, and they were acquitted by other white people. We've been seeing this song for the history of this country. And that wasn't lost on people of color, but it's completely lost on white people. The other thing that white people just have a very difficult time seeing white people as terrorists, no matter what they do. You cannot be a terrorist and be white, period.
Yes. Talk to me about this.
Well, it's the name of my new book. It's called White People Can't Be Terrorists. Because I look like
Hollywood has made it like terrorists have to be brown Muslim people.
No, I think life has made it that way. We are the dominant group, and we were attacked on 9/11, and other terrorist attacks have been by brown people, generally Muslims. And the terrorist attacks that have occurred by white people, they weren't terrorists. They were bad people, Planned Parenthood or the Klan, but they weren't terrorists because you can't be a terrorist if you're American. You can only be a terrorist if you are a foreigner. And therein lies the danger, because the danger posed by people who live here is far more than the danger posed by people who have trouble getting in.
Yes, thank you. How perfectly articulated. Yes. And I also think, even though the FBI just a couple of months ago, I think still under the Trump administration, said that the greatest threat in America is white terrorism, people are not absorbing that or understanding what that means. People don't understand what that means. But I feel like we are terrified of it. You know, I'm still not over that. The U.S. Capitol is like the beacon of democracy, you know, and I grew up in a country where America was always monitoring our democracy and our press freedom and our elections and making sure everything running smoothly. And then the U.S. Capitol, it was traumatic. And it made me realize how much I love this country, but it also made me realize, Americans need to get with it. They're not taking shit seriously, and they don't know what's wrong, and then they don't understand white violence. And if people of color talk about it too much, what do I get all the time? That I hate white guys, that, I'm racist. I also think we need to rebrand racism and racist, because I don't think that, I talk about this in my book, actually, because Dr. Ibrahim Kendi says this, that even David Duke says that he's not racist. And even the KKK say that they're not racist. Like, white people are so offended by that. So we need to come up with another word about it, because even if you're offended by that, it ends the conversation.
Well,
but we still have to talk about it.
I don't know what the word is, but I do have a theory that I'd love to run past you, which is it's the easiest way to understand, or one of the most racist things that we do as a country, or that we do even as individuals. As a country, we make it difficult for black people to vote. And as individuals, we support politicians who vote to make it difficult for black people to vote. So if you're voting to make black people, make it difficult for them to vote, to have obstacles in the way of voting. If you're voting, that's a racist thing to do. Let's just start there. Voting is everybody's right if you are a citizen. Let's start there. Do you think black people should have the right to vote? Yes? Okay. Well, then they should restore the Voting Rights Act that Republicans stripped, which was obviously a racist thing to do. I start with access to voting, because all the other issues that we talk about don't matter if you're not able to have your vote counted.
Yeah. But also, what was at the core of the Capitol riot, right? The Georgia elections.
Yeah,
right?
They thought their vote was stolen.
Too many black people telling us what to do. The core of that anger was incredibly racist. Until we find another word for it, that is what it was about.
They don't, but they don't realize. I really don't even think they realize that when we talk about voters in Philadelphia and Milwaukee and Atlanta and Detroit, that we're talking about black people. That's what we're talking about. And then they'll make the argument, well, it's not racist. They're the ones who've been, historically cheating on elections, which of course is also nonsense. But that's the narrative that they're buying. I read something yesterday that said, the vast majority of Republicans think that they are discriminated against, white Republicans, more than people of color. It's harder to be white in America is something that a frighteningly large percentage of Americans believe. And I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah, I don't think there is anything you can do about that, because I think right now, what we saw with Trump's acquittal really as well is that it really is about two Americas. And one of those Americas really doesn't like the browning of America, the black and browning of America. And why should you? Who wants to give up like power and privilege?
You're not giving up power and privilege. That's the farce, though, right? That you're giving up something if other people.
They don't want to see like a woman of color as the second most powerful person in the country. They didn't want to see a black person in the White House. That shit matters to them. I don't think they like it. And, I went to UVA, so I know a lot of nice and polite racists, country club racists. But that they don't like it. And now I'm understanding that they also don't like me mouthing off too much,
Why? What do you hear? Like, what do you hear? Share with people the kinds of responses that you get when you get too bold.
Oh my God. I hear the most that I am racist, that I need to go back to my own like fucked up country. I hear that I'm angry, that I hate white men, that I'm jealous of white men.
What do you say to that? How do you respond if you respond to those types of accusations? How do you feel about the whites?
I don't respond anymore. I used to, but I don't respond anymore. You know, when you get in your 40s, you're just like, I really have zero F's to give. Yeah. But the other day, somebody sent me something on my phone that came from an Apple ID that was Anushay Hossain at like apple.com. It was really crazy. And I had to show it to my husband because this person wanted to kill me.
What?
I was like, how did you get on my phone? And I also I'm on not on air as much as I used to be. I've kind of been writing a book. I don't even know what happened, but this person was like, the C word, all the words. And I was like, this person knows where I live. He's gonna kill me.
You weren't responding to me, and I was just trying to get your attention to get you back on the show.
I knew it was you.
I apologize, but it worked.
A lot of times you just have to laugh but this time, my husband has started this thing now where he's like, I want you to show me this stuff because we should really, he works in security and mobile security. So he was like, we just have to send everything to the FBI. And I'm like, no, what if they deport me?
Well, that's the kind of fear that it would seem irrational because you're not legally a person who could be deported. But at the same time, I think it's also that joke belies a certain fear and concern that, naturally born Americans never have to be concerned with. But people like yourself, I remember thinking that some of those concerns were not well thought out or were irrational fears. And then Trump got elected, the Muslim ban, and he was trying to deport anybody who was not the right shade. And so it's not that irrational and sadly.
No, and one of the big things I say also back to my forthcoming book, is that the three main health issues right now for women in America are depression, which was already bad pre-pandemic, but now with pandemic depression, pandemic related anxiety, women having to not work anymore, they're stuck in their homes, all this stuff. So it's depression, then it's COVID itself. And then the third thing is domestic violence, which has just been surging in this pandemic. Yeah. And one of the things is a lot of people in New York, particularly because it's such a big immigrant city, they are dependent on their partners for their papers and their immigration crap. So they cannot go to the police. They don't even know where their papers are. So they don't even know what the status is. So a lot of these women, I was talking to a lot of women CEOs of these shelters like Saki, who's specifically for Asian Americans. And it was just really, they were saying how words like self-isolate, quarantine, these are all trigger words for domestic violence survivors, and how so many of them, because of COVID, they're trapped. They're in quarantine with their abusers.
And you didn't mention what I've been hearing from so many economists, that the economic the depression has affected women so much more disproportionately because they end up being the caretakers for their kids who have to stay home from school. And that is, just been a major impact of the pandemic on one gender over the other.
Yeah. Also in December, 140,000 jobs that were lost in the U.S. economy were lost by women and women of color. And men actually gained 16,000 jobs.
We still got it.
Got it.
That's horrible. That's a crazy statistic, but it's such a disproportionate lopsided outcome on gender and race on this pandemic that I feel like we can't talk about it enough, and we have to do everything we can to correct for it. And that's why I'm, really happy to be talking with you about it. But where do you think we go from? Oh, I wanted to ask you, I should have asked you before we started taping because maybe you weren't paying attention, but did you pay attention to that Biden administration communications staffer, TJ, whatever he said, and that drama that played out?
Yes.
Where, if people don't know, and I shouldn't have brought it up without having it right in front of me, but Biden administration deputy in the communications department below his, reports his spokesperson, Jen Psaki, not a hugely well-known guy, but he basically threatened a Politico reporter. And
known. I mean, Tara, do you know her?
No, I don't know her, but she's a very well-known reporter. And so
Tara
Palmieri, yeah. They suspended this guy, the Biden administration, for a week without pay. And yesterday he resigned. And if it weren't for the impeachment, that would have been a much bigger story. What are your thoughts on that? Because a lot of people were pointing to, Biden's record on women and violence against women and all of this. He's got a pretty good record. And he said, listen, anybody screws up, I'll fire you on the spot. And so I felt like they were too lenient with that guy. Maybe I'm missing something.
Well, they did. He resigned. So he's out. Well, this goes to show that, come on. First of all, okay, Biden is a great man. I'm a huge Biden fan. I used to work with him on the Hill way back in the day for the International Violence Against Women Act. He is the champion of the Violence Against Women Act, plus CEDAW, which is the UN International Women's Rights Treaty. He is really like a stellar person. But come on. How are you going to know? How are you going to know? And I just thought it was crazy that he was in the press a week before for having stage 4 cancer and this love affair that he's having, or relationship he's having with this Axios reporter who's taken off the beat, the White House beat. And then you turn around and he's like threatening another reporter. So I'm glad he resigned. And I think that they should have been a little bit faster on it. Yep. I think they were probably, I don't know. I don't think it was getting the kind of priority it should have been given.
Yeah. And hopefully
I think Biden probably just kind of heard about it himself. Jen Psaki, that's a part of her communications team. I don't think they were following this. I think they underestimated the story. But he's on record threatening this reporter and saying just terrible things.
Yeah, idiotic. Just like who says such things? Like, I'll ruin your career.
This guy has his own problems, and I'm very sad that he's not well. I was going to go like this, which is, what you do in Bangladesh when you don't want anything bad to come back.
Oh, that's funny. I've never heard. I'm very
sorry about his illness, but he's still a dick.
Yes.
Inexcusable.
No, it doesn't excuse it. Nothing excuses it.
No.
Type of behavior.
And I feel like his girlfriend now is probably having some second thoughts, because last week they were the front page story of media, and she's like, oh, I wouldn't have thought about it twice. I love him. And this week it's like, I don't know.
By the way, it makes me, whenever I'm like railing on a guy in a situation like that, it always forces me to think, like, have I ever done or said anything like, I'll destroy your career? Or even then I say, well, of course I haven't, but have I ever said something like, do you know who I am? And the answer is no. It's no. It doesn't make me a good man or a noble man. We give too much credit, I think. It's like, that's not normal what that guy did. You know who I am? I'll destroy your career. Come on. That's preposterous.
And also, who are you, Mr. 24-year-old?
Is he that young? Oh, God.
No, they're not 24, but I heard last night we were talking about this. And I think he's like, they're really young. They're like 29, 30. So I'm like, who are you? You're still like a comms person. Yes, you're in the White House, but as you can see, anything can be taken away from you. So behave. Everybody should behave.
All right. I know you got to go. Last question. What is your quick take on the future of the Republican Party, given the insurrection, given the acquittal, given the fact that I actually haven't, we forgot to argue. That bring up the argument, but maybe you disagree with me. Maybe we can argue about this. I think Trump, I think I'm alone on this, or pretty lonely on this, loses so much influence without his Twitter, social media, and, the bully pulpit of the White House. I think he loses a lot of influence. I think that the cult wants to follow him, but they can't hear him. But maybe, I hope I'm right, but everybody thinks I'm wrong. What do you think of the future there?
I think that's a good point, but I think you're wrong, just because Trump wasn't the problem.
Agreed. But he was the director. He was the conductor. And
he represented a problem that has been there, that has wanted, a leader, a space. And I think they've created that. I think people forget how much immigrants love America. And I think sometimes what I really hated about...
They don't know to begin with. People don't forget. They don't know. Only immigrants, only people who have a perspective of living elsewhere can love the new place.
No, but also, it wasn't like Bangladesh was such a horrible place to live, but all the great things that, I know it's a big arm of U.S. foreign policy and they're not doing it because they're Santa Claus, but such amazing things have happened from USAID programs. I mean, in the State Department, it's like democracy, health, education. These things are really important. So I love this country so much. And then sometimes when you see how much people, it's like you don't even appreciate, what you have. And also they don't want you to have it. It's a lot of hate and anger. And they feel like they're entitled to everything. And, maybe they are. But we're here. No one's going to go anywhere. It's like when they wanted to send all the slaves back. Do you remember this? When they had this idea a long time ago to send the slaves back to Africa. So now we are all here. And there's a lot of Americans that don't want to share. A lot of white people that don't want to share.
Yeah. Well, I'm not one of them. And I am happy to have you and all immigrants here. I want way more immigrants.
People in the world on your show.
Well, I just to be interested in and curious about people who are different from you does not seem. Why is that not a kind of a normal? I guess it's not normal because there's a normal fear. It is more normal to be afraid of new things. But I don't know. Being curious about new things and new people has always been more attractive to me. But
I think the future of the Republican Party is that it's going to. I think they're going to split within themselves too. It's not just about two.
Right,
I think it might be three at one point, because there are some Republicans now even that are like, "Hey, this is too much." I tweeted out a tweet in support of Liz Cheney the other day. I never thought that would happen.
Yeah.
I don't even think she wants me to be tweeting out in support of her. But what was happening to her? Oh my God, in her own party. So. And she's a Cheney.
I know.
Her dad's still alive. Do not mess.
I know. I couldn't go as far as tweeting out support for Liz Cheney. I did reach out to the guy that Dick Cheney shot in the face, and I said, "Hey, man, how are you?"
Do you remember when that guy got shot in the face?
Yes, I was a joke in my stand-up act forever.
But then he had a press conference and apologized.
Yes. That's how powerful Dick Cheney is. He shot a guy in the face, and the guy who got shot apologized. Yes.
And he said, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience I've caused the Cheney family."
It was the greatest. It was the greatest. I wish I had that power.
Dick Cheney, respect.
Oh, my God. My wife would be constantly apologizing because all I do is screw everything up. Like, hey, listen, I think you should apologize to me for destroying the bathtub drain. I think you owe me an apology.
I love that you fix things around the house, because as brilliant as my husband is, I am the MacGyver in our relationship, which should tell you a lot.
Yeah, but your husband's brilliance probably allows you to afford people who can fix things appropriately.
Yes, but I always try first.
Well, anytime you have failures, please report them to me, because it makes me feel seen.
Oh, I will, Pete. I got to go because I have a blank.
Thank you very much for joining me. Great to talk to you.
Thanks, all right, Anushay. This is too much fun. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye. All right, Anushay Hossain, follow her on Twitter. Tell her that you heard her on the program as well earlier as Jared Holt. Thank you very much for supporting the program with the paid subscription. Could not do it without you. If you haven't signed up, today's the day. I'll give shout outs to new subscribers either tomorrow or the next day. I always forget, but I'll always mention every new subscriber on the air. I didn't do that at the very beginning, so if I never gave you a shout out and you want one, I'm more than happy to give it. Thank you so much for giving it to me. The subscription, that is. I greatly appreciate it. Go now, sign up, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Lots of great benefits with membership. Hope to see you Thursday night at 8 East. If there's any special guests you want me to invite on, tell me now. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Send me your vitamin N, your news dump jingle, your dispatches from your life, whatever you want. send it to me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, on Twitter, @Pete Dominic, Instagram, TikTok, Clubhouse, Funhouse, Chuck E. Cheese, you name it, I'm on it, and just look me up, and I will see you there. Take it away, John Carroll. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Love you. Goodbye.
The sirens teach you better stand up, stand up. Let the brave meet the challenge, let the weak flee. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up, stand up. I think you're driving wheels been leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up, that's right. You got to rise up, you got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, 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 come on. Stand up.
I have to tell you something, and this is kind of embarrassing, and so that's why I saved it here for the last, because only some of you listen and know that there's always a secret message here in the end, but it's another liberation, truth liberation, like yesterday's show, and it's this. I eat a shit ton of pizza. I mean, I don't know how much a shit ton is. That's why I'm using that as the increment. I don't know how much you eat, but I probably eat more than you. I don't know. I eat pizza a couple times a week. At least once a week, we have pizza. I don't know how much is too much, but I know it's too much, and I feel like I should stop. So I feel I just need, again, to be seen. I need you to come to my aid and let me know how much pizza is too much pizza. And then we can talk about it. Thank you. Thank you for your support. Let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com.